Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster. Mysterious creatures have been seen and discussed since the beginning of time, and in modern times, we call these cryptids, and there's a lot of interest in them. But just what is a cryptid? Why are they considered paranormal? And what's all the fuss about? This is the Paranormal Christianity Podcast, and in this episode, we're doing Cryptids 101. I'm Darren Ingram. Helping me out, as always, is Dan Ingram, who, along with his Masters of Theology, has 36 years of pastoral experience. He has even written a book on the UFO topic called 1952, the year the U.S. military disclosed the existence of UFOs. Dan, thanks for helping us out.
Good to be here. Looking forward to it.
And people can find that book on Amazon, correct?
On Amazon, type my name in, Dan Ingram, 1952. It should pop up.
All right. Okay, so I got to admit, I'm not a cryptid guy. I don't know a lot about cryptids. I know the name. I know that it encompasses creatures like Bigfoot and Loch Ness, but I'm more of a UFO person, more of a ghosts and spirits person. But when you're talking paranormal with somebody, invariably they're going to lump cryptids in with all of this. And sometimes I wonder, why are we talking about Bigfoot all of a sudden when we've been talking about ghosts and aliens as the paranormal? So maybe you can help me out on that a little bit tonight. So cryptids, from what I understand, are basically creatures that we maybe haven't discovered yet. But see, and this is what throws me as well, because every year scientists are always discovering a new species that we haven't seen before. Every year it happens. Something in the bottom of the sea, something up in the trees of a rainforest. They discover a new frog or something like that. So up until that point, was that frog a cryptid? Is a cryptid simply an animal that we haven't discovered before? Give me some background about cryptids, where the name came from. How did we get started on this?
So really, in 1955, there was a landmark book written by a zoologist, and his name was Huvelman. And he kind of coined the term cryptozoology. And he took animals that had been spoken of, said they had been seen, back in the ages or whatever, like Bigfoot or Loch Ness or something. And he began to study these things. But it wasn't until, and that came out in 1959, but it wasn't until 1983 that the term cryptid was actually coined from cryptozoology. So it's a fairly recent coined term, in 1983. So instead of calling them monsters or whatever, they called them cryptids. Now, like the frogs they discover or the insects or the plants, these aren't things that have been said, hey, we saw this frog and it's purple and blue spots with crazy stripes on the back of it. And people go, yeah, that doesn't exist. That's a cryptid because it has purported to have been seen, but nobody can see it. But if it's just discovered, nobody knows it's there, that's not really a cryptid. You don't know to call it a cryptid if you don't know it. So those are just things that people just discover. But it's things. Go ahead.
So the cryptids that we're talking about today, they don't seem to be a frog with an extra color on it that someone's found in the jungle. Cryptids today are like these mythical creatures from old or something like that. Yeah. Is that what it started out as being?
Well, yeah, it started out, his book started out by talking about unsubstantiated animals that people said exist, like Yeti, Sasquatch. And so he began to collect these things together. Now, if someone said there's a frog with two heads out there and it's got, 5 legs, but nobody's ever found it, several people say they've seen it, then that would be put in the cryptid category because it is said to have been seen and exist. But if nobody sees it, it can't be put in a cryptid. It's just discovered.
Have there been instances of an animal being a cryptid where people have said, "Oh, we've seen X and X kind of animal"? People are like, "Well, no one else has," and they got classified as a cryptid. Then it got discovered later.
Yes, in fact, I can give you the top 7 animals that have been considered cryptids and have been put in the cryptozoology section until they have been actually discovered. These are in no.
Let's start with number 7.
Order.
No particular order. All right.
You know what? We will start with number 7. That's not a bad idea.
Okay.
All right. Some of these you're going to say, and I'll go pretty quick because they're self-explanatory. You're going to go, what? But they were considered cryptids. People said these things exist, and other people in parts of the world said, nah, they don't exist.
So these are actually, they were found, or they were seen, they were discussed. People said, hey, I see this thing. Other people said, nope, that's not correct. Then it was discovered. Number 7.
Number 7, the guy who actually was named, our America was named for, was an explorer. His name was
Amerigo Vespucci.
Vespucci. And he, in 1499, was sailing along the south coast of the Australian border and found these animals that hopped, and came back and said, there's these animals that look like rats with a long tail and a long nose and little hands, and they jump around, and they're kangaroos. And people said, nah, there's not anything like that.
They didn't believe him.
And the kangaroo was in the cryptid category because he said they exist, and people go, there's nothing like that exists in the world. And sure enough, they were found to exist. That is number 7.
That's a neat little piece of trivia, that kangaroos were actually a cryptid.
Absolutely.
I like that. Number 6.
Bondigizu. Now, the Bondigizu looks kind of like a panda bear, but it's one of the ancestral spirits of the Moni people in western Papua New Guinea. And it was a strange little looking animal, but it wasn't until the 1980s that Tim Flannery took the first picture of a Bondigizu.
So there was an indigenous people that actually worshipped this thing.
Yes, and said it exists. Nobody could find it. And it is a tree-dwelling marsupial that they say it looks like a tiny man, but it looks more like a panda. And it walks around on 2 legs. And it is on the endangered species list.
Cryptid no longer.
Cryptid no longer.
Number 5.
Number 5, the giant squid. Now, some people still consider this a cryptid, but I remember when this happened, the first true picture of a giant squid didn't happen until 2004. I was really excited and followed this. It was a 24-foot female giant squid. This thing was huge, and other big squids don't get that big. And so they found these pictures, and they've taken pictures of giant squids since then. But science says it's more than a hoax. It really does exist, this super giant squid, 24 feet.
We've had reports of giant squids. We've all seen the pictures of the tentacles coming up around ships, and stories of the Kraken, right? This isn't quite, it's 24 feet, so it's still not quite to those levels, right?
Correct. But
this is still a magnitude larger than what we've known of.
Most giantest we can find of the giant squid.
Okay, 24 feet. Do you happen to know what a normal squid is? I'm not a squid expert, but
no, I did not take squidology in college.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, I have eaten a few tentacles, however.
Well, I'm sure that's something that we might be able to find out. But giant squid was number 5, and that was a cryptid until 2004.
2004.
Wow, that was recent. Number 4.
Number 4. I bet you didn't expect to see this one on the cryptid list, although I had known this for quite a while, and that is European explorers had found this monster-like thing and first started reporting it in the 5th century BC by a Greek explorer. His name was Hanno. And this thing was in Asia, and they did not know what to call it until they actually captured one, brought it back, and this thing is now called a gorilla.
Oh, get out.
Highland gorilla.
500 BC.
No, 5 BC.
5 BC.
5th century BC. 5th century BC.
That's 500 BC.
That's 500 BC, yes. And so it was reported for hundreds of years to be an exaggerated animal until and we all are so familiar with the gorilla, we say, surely, a gorilla is not a cryptid.
Yeah,
it was considered a cryptid.
They probably reported it as what we would think of a Bigfoot now. It looks like a man, but it's hairy. Correct. Walks on its back 2 legs, about the size of a man, or maybe a little heavier.
Much like me and you.
Bigfoot wishes he has my hair.
I'm telling you.
But so in 500 BC, Hanno the Greek captured one of these things.
Well, no, he first began to say that they existed. He saw one.
He saw it.
Yeah. And I don't have what year down here that they were discovered, but I believe it was if I'm not right, I believe it was in the early 1800s that they were actually found to exist.
Gorillas?
Mm-hmm. Because they're over late 1700s, early 1800s.
They were cryptids for 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm. Somebody may correct me on that, but I think I remember reading that it's like the early 1800s.
But gorillas were a cryptid at one time.
Yes, sir.
Number 3.
This is an animal that you may not have heard of. It's called the okapi.
I have heard of it.
Yes.
I couldn't tell you if it was a bird or whatever, but I've heard of it.
It is known as the forest giraffe, and it is a blend of zebra, donkey, deer, and antelope. So I'm looking at a picture right now.
I'll put one up on the screen.
Okay, okapi, O-K-A-P-I. Europeans in the 18th and 19th centuries called the animal the African unicorn. But Africans knew the okapi existed, but it wasn't until 1901 that Sir Henry Johnson found an okapi skeleton and skin and sent it to the British Museum, where it was classified as a new species. So literally the legs, just the legs, front and back legs, are horizontally striped like a zebra.
Right.
And kind of the rear and half of it looks like a giraffe. It's got a little longer neck. It's a strange looking breed of animal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was a cryptid until 1900. And what'd you say, 1901? What does that take us up to? Number 2?
Number 2.
Number 2,
if you weren't familiar with a platypus and you saw this thing, it is a mammal with a duck bill, looks like an otter and a beaver, all that kind of stuff together. And naturalists and scientists had seen it, but could not get people to believe that this thing that all these animals were put together could exist. The second governor of New South Wales, Captain John Hunter, actually sent a pelt and a sketch of a platypus in 1798 to the powers that be. And even at the time when he sent that platypus, they said it was a hoax and reconstructed. Nothing is in existence like this, not a platypus. And they thought he was just making it up. but it was eventually proven to be real. So cryptids don't have to be monsters and, clawed things. They're animals who are said to exist that people go, there's no way that can exist.
Well, yeah, that okapi and the platypus, they look like they're just pieces of other animals that have been put together.
Like a Mr. Potato Head, just
Right.
kind of pop up. Yep.
You would say, oh, someone's putting us on.
Yep.
All right, number one.
Number one. Until 1910, stories of a giant lizard on the island of Komodo in Indonesia were laughed at by any respectable scientist. But when Lieutenant Stein van Hansbroek caught one and killed one, things changed. And it wasn't until 1930, in the 1920s, that everybody finally said, yes, the Komodo dragon actually does exist. These things were thought cryptids for hundreds of years. And the dragons were put on display at the Bronx Zoo and inspired Marion C. Cooper to write the 1933 classic King Kong.
Ah.
And yeah. So a Komodo dragon. Yes.
The thing that I take away from this, it frustrates me when scientists say something doesn't exist
or can't exist
or can't. When they say, and since this is the Paranormal Christianity podcast, it frustrates me when I hear, I'm waving my pen at the camera. This is how frustrated I get about this. When they say God doesn't exist, or that a prime mover of the universe doesn't exist. I'm like, you can say you don't believe it. You can say you can't prove it. And I would agree with them on that it's, how do you prove God? But when they say it doesn't exist, that frustrates me.
Well, that's the argument. You can't prove a negative.
I know, but I even extend that to people who don't believe in God. When they say God does not exist, I'm like, you can't prove that. You can't prove it. And they'll say, well, you can't prove that God exists either. I say, maybe I can't prove it to you, but it's proven to me. So I can believe it. But you can't prove that God doesn't exist. Not even for yourself, you can't prove God doesn't exist.
Yes.
That's a big takeaway for me with this cryptid stuff. Hearing scientists through the years that say, that doesn't exist. The platypus doesn't exist. The okapi doesn't exist. So that's my rant.
Okay.
So cryptids, I like what you said. I think a lot of time we think cryptids, we automatically go to the two big ones, Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster.
Mm-hmm.
They're the
big five.
They're what?
There's the big five cryptids. You know, in Africa, like hunters, they'll hunt the big five, like rhino. What is it? Rhino, elephant, lion, water buffalo, whatever. There's the big five, right? That's where the big five sporting goods name comes from. It's the big five animals that you hunt in Africa.
Oh,
so there's the big five cryptids as well. There's more cryptids than that, but there's the big five.
Oh, there's tons of cryptids. What are the big five? Number 5.
Well, if you'll give me a chance to find the list.
Wow.
We're going to have to start at number 5 again. Hang on a minute.
You got me all set up for the big 5.
You set it up and I can't knock it down. Here we go. Hang on. Yeah, well, I'm like that.
You're a well-oiled machine.
Here we go. I had it in front of me.
Number 5.
Number 5, the chupacabra.
Oh, yes.
Mexico, this little dog-like demon dog thing that goes around sucking the blood out of chickens and goats.
That's in Mexico, Central America?
Yes.
I've heard of the chupacabra.
Chupacabra.
Sure. Oh, you even got the accent on it.
Oh, yeah.
Now, and they said it's a small dog.
Well, it's a medium-sized.
What differentiates it from a normal dog?
This thing sucks the blood out of chickens and goats, and it's evil and wicked and mean. Oh, my.
All right.
Number
4.
The Mothman. Remember the Mothman prophecies?
Oh yeah, I mean
Over in
I've read
Virginia,
the book, I've watched the movie.
the bridge
Sure,
that fell, the Mothman.
people
Yes,
still report seeing that.
absolutely not so much, but it comes kind of in waves.
I
Yep.
always thought that was more of a kind of like a spiritual entity, but I guess we can get into that whether.
You know,
Which we'll table that here for a second.
you put up a yellow light outside and he doesn't come around.
That's pretty good. I like that. Number 3.
Number 3, the Jersey Devil. This thing is like
Wait, you're
kind of
not
like,
talking about Chris Christie now, are you?
oh,
Bam.
bam. The Jersey Devil kind of looks like a horse on 2 legs, and it's got real skinny back legs, and it's got hooves on the back legs, not like cloven hooves, I think like a horse hoof, but has kind of like small little arms, but it has big wings, and it's called the Jersey Devil, and people do see this quite a bit.
Is it now? It says Jersey Devil. Is it from New Jersey or is it like Jersey over in England?
Oh, it's in New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Yeah.
The Jersey Devil. Okay. Number 2.
Number 2, the Loch Ness Monster, or
Of course. Nessie.
Nessie.
Now,
And, go ahead.
we've all seen the famous picture
Mhm.
of the head sticking up and, going out there. That's it. That's the picture.
Yep.
And that was taken back in the 50s or 60s?
Yes. However, there have been several recently, like right now, recently, that people have taken, and they can't disprove that these have been faked or anything like that.
Right.
This thing is showing up more and more right now.
Oh, really? Because I know there was one guy who came out and said, "Oh, I faked that
Yes.
particular photo."
Yeah.
But other people do. Now, has the Loch Ness Monster been seen for like hundreds of years, or is this a fairly recent thing?
No, it's a long time. This goes back for hundreds of years. I particularly think it's like a plesiosaur, kind of like the coelacanth, that is just a fish that they thought was extinct. I think it's a plesiosaur type thing, because all of these lochs, sometimes a loch is a lake over in Scotland, and so a lot of these are connected with tunnels and stuff. And I particularly think that this is a plesiosaur that we think has died and gone extinct, but still lives and reproduces in the lochs.
Just an old historic monster, creature, dinosaur.
Dinosaur.
All right. And I think we know what number 1's going to be.
Number 1, cryptid. It is the granddaddy cryptid of them all, and that is Sasquatch. Bigfoot.
Bigfoot.
Or the Yowie if you're in Australia.
Okay.
Yes. Or the Yeren if you're in China.
Which is interesting because it seems like all over the world they have their own version of this cryptid.
Yes. Up in, the abominable snowman up in the mountains. And
is that the same as a Yeti?
Like a Yeti.
So
yes.
if you're in the mountains where it's all snowy and you see a white one of these, I bet he met a Yeti.
I bet he met a Yeti. Here's something that's not mystery science that I have hanging on my wall, and that is an actual Bigfoot cast from the Mount Hood National Forest near Escataway, Oregon. This was found in 1994, and this is an actual Bigfoot cast found in the Oregon mountains in the Pacific Northwest, where I used to live.
So that's
Washington
not like
State.
a model or something. That was cast. That specific thing that's the plaster that was poured into the dirt of a Bigfoot impression.
So what they did is they poured the original, okay? Then they took the original and made a cast and poured plaster in it. So this is one off of the original, because
from the original mold.
from the original mold. This is the first generation off the original mold. Yes. And this thing is big. I wear a size 13 shoe.
Take your shoe off.
Hang on a minute. I was just let me move my microphone.
All right. Okay.
So that's gonna be probably 16, 18, maybe a 20. I mean,
Are there humans that have feet that large, like these huge football players or basketball players?
You know, I knew some people that had like a size 16 shoe, 18. Basketball players often have to have their shoes special made.
Sure.
But I don't think there's anybody with, I mean, this is like a 10E or whatever.
So how tall would that equate to in a human? Did they say?
I asked the guy that, and he said approximately 8.5 to 10 feet tall.
Goodness gracious!
Can you imagine this thing? Look, kicking you in the head.
I mean we see 7-foot players in the NBA all the time, but not 8 to 10.
Hey, I was up next to a 7-foot guy one time. I couldn't believe it. He was just massive. And these things are 8 to 10 foot tall on average.
Goodness gracious. And so that was Oregon.
That was Mount Hood, Oregon.
I mean, look at that. It looks, hold that back up.
I mean, it
looks just like a normal, well, not quite like a human. It's like the toes seem kind of small for the rest of it.
Yeah, they kind of, there's a guy that researches these and has thousands of them. He has the biggest collection, and he can immediately tell if it's faked or not. And so I asked the guy who got this, he said this had been certified through that guy, and that'd been a few years ago when I got it, so I can't remember the name. But it has all the right things in it that's supposed to be there, as opposed to a board or a fake one, because I didn't just want to be suckered in, you know. So I did ask about that. So as far as that goes, I mean, it's got the ridges and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it's Urtrabugen.
Well, let me ask some obvious questions here.
I've got some obvious answers.
So there's actually, for Bigfoot, I guess there's been quite a bit of anecdotal evidence. People have reported to have seen Bigfoot. There's video footage every now and then of what people say is Bigfoot, but it's tough to see, or it's really far away, very much like a UFO sighting, where it's like we can never seem to get a clear, full-on picture. It's always just evidence that something has been here, although a foot is pretty impressive. But people have been reporting Bigfoots and Yetis. I mean, the word Sasquatch comes from the Native Americans, right? I mean, they were reporting it way back when. We're talking hundreds of years ago.
And even in hundreds and hundreds of years ago, back in Alaska. I mean, this thing traveled down. Yeah.
So what's our problem with taking a picture of straight up of one, of capturing one? I'm guessing with all the hunters out there, why hasn't someone just plugged one and just put one down?
Well, first of all, let me talk about pictures. There are pictures on the internet. These guys go out and they've gotten so close to these things. They've gotten pictures, they've gotten videos. There's no denying, and they can't prove these things fake. There's no denying what they got. I mean, they're close ups, and they were close. So there's lots of pictures now. But this is the argument years ago that people used to use. Well, there's no pictures and they're all blurry and blah, blah. Not anymore. There's so many cameras, so many phones, so many trail cams. These things are getting pictures all the time. Secondly, people have shot them, and I'll talk about that in just a second. There are a couple of testimonies of men who've been on obviously on TV, radio, whatever, who get very emotional when they tell the story, because once they shoot it, they feel like they have committed murder, because it is so much like a human.
Right.
One guy shot a juvenile and went back the next day because he felt so bad, and it had already been taken, he thinks, by the adults. But it disturbed him very, very, very much. There are hair samples that people get that come back that cannot be categorized as anything that we know. Now, sometimes it's, oh no, that's a buffalo, that's a cow, that's a horse. But there's a lot of hair samples that come back that, because there's no category for Bigfoot, we can't say, oh, that's a Bigfoot hair. Bigfoot. It's just categorized as nothing that we know of has this DNA in this hair.
All right.
So it is a cryptid hair.
Well, I don't want this to turn into a Bigfoot episode. No. We'll do an episode on Bigfoot by itself.
But I will tell you, there are 3 categories of cryptids that you may not know about. And those 3 categories are the aqua cryptids in the water, and the terrestrial cryptids on land, and the hominoid cryptids on land. But the hominoids are the ones like Bigfoot and others that walk upright. So there's 3 categories of cryptids: water, terrestrial, and hominoid.
So I guess water would be the supergiant squid, or
for instance, up in Lake Champlain, Champy, up in where is that? Not Minnesota. Shoot. Anyway, there's a Loch Ness monster in Lake Champlain. There is the king otter, this giant, huge otter-like carnivorous aquatic thing in the world.
All right.
So
so what would terrestrial be?
Terrestrial, those are things like the chupacabra.
Okay, sure.
The lizard man of Lee County in South Carolina. People also thought the giant ground sloth was one. It's called the Alagohi, which is in the Gobi Desert, and this is huge worm-like creature that comes up and eats people.
Okay, we're going to do an episode where we just go through tons of these cryptids. This is fascinating. So and so a hominoid. Hominoid, what you said was like a Bigfoot or a Yeti.
Bigfoot, the Falk monster of Arkansas. You remember the Falk, the Boggy Creek monster? They made a big movie out of it. But the monster of Boggy Creek.
Yes, I've heard of that movie.
Yes, it's like back in the early 70s. Not a great movie put together, but it is a historical movie. The Boggy Creek monster, or the Falk monster. The skunk ape down in Florida.
I've heard of the skunk ape. So there's 3. You said there's these 3 categories. Is there some kind of reporting group or some kind of authority? I'm always after, who's the authority behind, who makes the rules? I'm always saying, who gets to make those rules? Is there some kind of ruling council of cryptids, or I think you even said that you could even get a degree in these things. Who's doing this stuff?
So for UFOs, there's the UFO Accounting Center that you can call, the main number. There's MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. There's the UFO Reporting Network in Washington, Washington State. So there's a reporting agency for UFOs. Now, if there's a reporting agency for cryptids, I do not know. There may be. However, when these things start becoming news, people just kind of gather this in. So I don't know that there's a reporting center for cryptids, except just word of mouth over the hundreds of years.
Well, like, who established there are 3 types of cryptids?
Well,
like, is this part of the degree that you said they offer? And who offers a degree in this?
So you can go online and look up degree. I think actually on Coursera there is a degree that takes you through the history of cryptids, what kind of cryptids are said to be out there. And so it's a pretty deep study of animals, of cryptozoology type animals. And so you can get a degree. I wouldn't say it's a bachelor's, doctor, or anything, but it's a certificate that you have studied at an extensive rate cryptology.
And I guess zoologists actually that are not considered pseudoscientists like cryptozoologists, but actual zoologists.
Yeah.
They don't really, it's like they don't get into, I mean, they may like it, but it's like zoology only studies what we know of that have been scientifically proven to exist.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to cryptozoology, you're studying something that hasn't been proven yet
mm-hmm.
that exists.
However, the chupacabra, there is a lady in Texas, and she's a doctor, and she's a naturalist, like animals and stuff like that. She found one of these, or someone found one of these on the road. This is a crazy looking thing. You'll need to look this up and maybe post it. But it has big nodule knobs on its hips. It looks kind of like a dog, but it's morphed a little bit. And she, right after it died, a truck hit it. She had it stuffed by a taxidermist, and it's now in her house. As a naturalist, she has a lot of animals in there. And I saw a documentary on this just the other day. And people think it's a chupacabra.
I think that's what. So, all right. Well, let me just go back to another. I feel like I'm circling back around to another question. A lot of these things have been reported by people for a long time. What's the problem with capturing these things? Now, let me say this. Back in the 1700s, 1800s, even well before then, 5th century BC, we didn't have cars or cameras or planes or anything like that. If you lived in a certain section of the world, you were pretty much isolated from all other sections for all intents and purposes. So I could see way back when how it would be easy that if the Komodo dragon was living on its island, that it would remain undiscovered for thousands of years. Not so today, though, so it seems like we should have some of these legendary creatures in the bag by now, which is about to bring me to one of my next points. I think you probably know where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. At what point, because I said earlier, I always associated Mothman with more of a spiritual side of things, mm-hmm. or maybe dimensional side of things rather than a creature mm-hmm. that we just haven't captured yet. Mm-hmm. And this might be why I think I mentioned it earlier in the episode. Why are cryptids all often, if Komodo dragon's one that we haven't it's just a lizard we haven't discovered yet and categorized, why are cryptids so often associated with the paranormal?
I think it's because there's no other place to put them. And so the paranormal side is happy to receive it. There are groups of people. There's a big fight and debate. I mean, this gets rough between people. There are groups of men and women who go out and their mission is nothing more than to kill a Bigfoot. That is their mission. Not just to kill it, but to kill it and prove that these things exist.
To bag it and tag it.
Bag it and tag it to prove it exists. There are other people that fight vehemently against that. So there are people working night and day to try to kill a bag and tag a Bigfoot. So because there's no category to put them in, they kind of naturally fall to that paranormal side. It's kind of like ghost. Are ghosts spiritual or are they paranormal? Well, they may be both, but because there's nowhere to put ghosts, they kind of go over to the paranormal side.
Well, there's a big, huge push to scientifically categorize ghosts and spirits now.
That's why we have all these measurements and instruments to try to scientifically categorize these things. Exactly right. But they haven't been accepted into that yet. So they kind of naturally fall to that side. Well, because we can't prove one, we can't hang one on the wall or skin it or whatever and say this is it. What happens is it becomes this thing that we say, okay, why can't we? Your question was great. Why can't we bag and tag one if people see them all the time? So then the thought process goes, maybe they're not a real animal. Maybe they are dimensional and they come and go, because for years there have been the association between Bigfoot and UFOs. A lot of people see a UFO and see a Bigfoot, or Bigfoot and UFO together. That's why you often see them in the little drawings and stuff. They're together because they're often seen together. So maybe they're not. Now, there are many, many people who say, yes, I believe in Bigfoot. However, I believe it's Giganticus pithecus, this giant ape that we have fossils of.
Okay.
This huge, huge ape that still eludes us, much like the coelacanths did in the ocean. This thing eludes us in the woods. And so there are many people who think that Bigfoot is just a giant ape that's really, really good at hiding and so forth and so on.
You'd have to be phenomenally good. Now, I know they say that Bigfoot and their kin live in the most remote parts of the world, the most wilderness parts of the world. But it just seems like, man, we've had a lot of years, and we've have a lot of technology going out specifically looking for these things now. And so you'll say that we'll get pictures and we'll get videos and stuff like that, but that's it. I know that there was a report of a person actually getting killed by a Bigfoot one time. But I think it was up in Washington State, or one of those places. I think there was a documentary about it. It eludes me right now. I wish I could remember that. But there was a pot farm, a marijuana farm. Of course, they put those in the most remote places as well, so they couldn't get found. This is way back when, and they'll booby trap them, and people know, you don't go up in there. And one of the workers came back and was saying, or maybe even multiple of the workers, there's something out there. And then one day, one of them was killed, like shredded, like mauled to the nth degree. And they think that they built this farm next to a Bigfoot home, and the Bigfoot was protecting itself. But even then, it's all anecdotal. It's all just conjecture. And after a while, I think we're all sitting around going, I'd love to believe in a Bigfoot or something like that. But man, it's been a long time.
Yeah, there's lots of audio. The people just spend their lives going out, and they would not fake this, because it would put them out of, I don't want to say out of business, but it would make them not credible.
It would discredit them.
And right. So there's all kinds of audio of these things almost talking. It's crazy.
I don't want to turn, like I said, I don't want to turn into just a Bigfoot discussion, but I want to say all the stuff that we're talking about Bigfoot, I want to apply to like all of these things, Jersey Devils and stuff like that. I've heard, we've heard these stories, Loch Ness Monster. It's not like we haven't tried, to get these things. And so I start to wonder, at what point do we start, because I have heard, and I think you have even talked about, and you mentioned earlier, there might be something more to these things than just earthbound realities.
I do believe, now this is my personal opinion, this is the DIV, Dan Ingram version. I have come to believe that Bigfoot is an interdimensional creature as a cryptid. I think there's a lot of cryptids out there. There's a lot of things that were created and morphed. evolve, not species to species. I don't believe in evolution, but I do believe that things can morph and change because of different things. But I think there's things out there we don't even know about. And I do personally believe that Bigfoot is probably one of these interdimensional creatures who can go in and out of portals or wormholes or whatever you want to call it. Would I stake my life on that? No, but I kind of believe that. And I think there's more to these things than we know.
You believe that because of the fact that we haven't bagged one yet, or have people seen this?
We haven't bagged one yet. Plus, people have on camera what they'll see is a Bigfoot. I mean, you can tell. And then it just dissolves into a shimmery type thing. And then just kind of, I mean, you can see this on camera. They just disappear, like they kind of fade back into a portal or a dimension or something.
So, just as far as general cryptids go, did any of your research say how many official cryptids there might be throughout the world? There's got to be hundreds, right?
I would say hundreds, because in my paper, there's things I've never even heard. Like the orang pendek in Sumatra is kind of like a short Bigfoot. But who's heard of an orang pendek? Well, I have, because I watch these shows and read. But there are hundreds of things, of little gnomes and creatures and things that run around that people get on camera in the Philippines. And I mean, those are cryptids. Oh, there's hundreds of them.
And because history is full of creatures like fairies. Yes. Would a fairy be considered a cryptid because it's a reported creature that we haven't found, or would that be more of a paranormal spirit creature? I mean, where do we draw the line between these things?
I don't know. I think because it's such a big study, but there's no definite bounds on it, that a lot of this stuff kind of crosses into spirit and cryptids. But I have seen and read where spirits like fairies are in the cryptid group, and there are videotapes of people that you can see they're absolutely flabbergasted when they get these little fairy things, these little sprites on camera. Those have been filmed too.
I guess they would. An alien, like one of these gray, let's just take the prototypical gray alien that people report. That would be considered a cryptid?
I've never that's weird. That would be an alien. So we have three areas of cryptids. You have the aqua, the terrestrial, and the hominoid. Now, aliens they are reported to walk on two legs, but they're more outer space. So I guess if the powers that be wanted to put a fourth cryptid in there, say outer space, but aliens aren't ever usually listed in the cryptid list.
Why wouldn't they be? They're not considered here from Earth.
I'm just guessing, but I guess so.
I mean, and this is, like I said, cryptids are nothing new. People have been reporting these. I mean, even the Bible had at least two cryptids in there, right?
Yeah, the behemoth, which is the Bible in Job talks about the behemoth, which is, it describes it as, if you were to draw this thing out, it looks like a brontosaurus, basically, what it looks like. The behemoth, it just looks like a brontosaurus. It talks about the legs and the tail and the long neck and the head, and it eats leaves and water. It's in the water, and it's Now the other cryptid, I guess if you want to call it, in the Bible is also mentioned in Job, and that's the Leviathan. And the Leviathan was an aquatic creature, and it says the scales are so thick that a spear couldn't get within it. Now, I particularly think that a lot of the myths that we have today come from something that already happened. And so this Leviathan is described in such detail that if you were to draw this thing out, it looks just like a swimming dragon. And the Bible says that it shoots fire from its mouth. Well, that's what dragons did. And so do I think people say, oh, you believe in dragons? Well, the Bible, if you believe in the Bible and you take it literally, which I do, here's my interpretation. I take the Bible literally unless it doesn't make sense. For instance, Jesus said, I am the door. Well, he's not a 2x4 door standing there. So it's symbolic. But if it describes something, unless it doesn't make sense, it is described in such detail that it blows fire from its mouth. People can't contain it. It bites chain link in two. They can't control it. So it's this huge water dragon that I really do believe existed. So can you prove it? No, you have to take it by faith, but there's 2 cryptids in the Bible.
Well, if you could prove it, it wouldn't be a cryptid.
Correct.
So cryptid by definition are things that haven't been proven to exist, which is kind of interesting to say I study cryptids. You know, how do you study something that hasn't even been proven to exist? But I guess you research the possibility of cryptids. So for people out there who are like, what's a cryptid, and are watching this, a cryptid is not something where you can point at it and say that's a cryptid, because it seems like the moment you can point and categorize something, it ceases to be a cryptid at that point.
Well, yes, if you can prove it scientifically, it ceases to be a cryptid. If you have the skin, the DNA, the bones, the skeleton, whatever, then, and science says, okay, that's what that is, then it ceases to be a cryptid. It is put into a new category.
Right. Yeah, it's just so. Let me just conjecture here just for a second.
Mm-hmm.
People are going out all the time hunting for scientific evidence of ghosts and spirits. Would a ghost or a spirit be considered a cryptid?
They're kind of in their own category because they're not something tangible. You can't take a ghost skin and hang it on the wall.
Right. But they're trying to. They are almost literally trying to do this with their measurements and readings. I mean, it's if they could do like in Ghostbusters and capture one in a box, they would certainly do that. And if they could say, I have a ghost in the bottle, and science can say, darned if that's not a ghost in the bottle, and they could measure it, study it, and do all that, would that mean ghosts are cryptids all this time?
That's a great question.
I just wondered. And so I wonder, are some of these things that we're seeing, that people are reporting, some kind of spiritual creature?
I wonder that too. I wonder if they can be even like the Jersey Devil or the Mothman. I'm wondering if they, well, this is another podcast, but if that maybe can't be demonic creatures that come and cause havoc.
Sure.
So, and we know that demons are spiritual. Right. However, the Mothman, Jersey Devil, those are put into the cryptid category. I guess we could say, are demons cryptids? Can you prove a demon? Well, they have their own category, demonology and demons.
That's right.
Angels as well. Can you prove an angel? No. Do they exist? Yes, I believe they do. But angels aren't cryptids. Angels have their own category. So I think cryptids are those things that people see on Earth that they see to be tangible but aren't proven yet.
Okay. All right. That's as good a definition as any. All right. Well, that's kind of Cryptids 101. This was actually more fascinating than I thought it was going to be. Like I said, I'm not a big cryptid guy. I was never just hugely interested in them. I see the reports. I see the people really getting into it. I see the Bigfoot festivals that people have where they go and I guess they swap stories and evidence, and they arrange hunting parties and whatnot. I've never really been into it. There, you got one right there. Where'd you get that shirt?
Actually, my wife got me this shirt. She thought it maybe looked like me or something. I have no idea. But I wish I was that buff. But
have you ever been to a cryptid meeting?
If I told you that, I'd have to kill you. So
okay. Well, we'll say no comment.
No comment. I do have my Bigfoot.
You got your Bigfoot.
And I have seen, when I lived in Washington State, I would go to these shops, different places, and ask about, because we're right there at Washington, in right. Bigfoot country. Different people have shown me casts of Bigfoot in Washington, like the National Geographic came out there and did a Bigfoot cast and gave them the original cast of that. And so I got to hold it and look at it. So I've seen, and I do ask about it, but this is the only Bigfoot cast that I do.
And I mean, you've been out hunting and stuff like that. Have you ever been up in those really remote wilderness areas where Bigfoot's supposed to be?
I have, and it's a little creepy. And there's places that you can walk and go, okay, I'm just deer hunting. Then there's times where you're, just hunting, and then something gets really, really creepy. I actually think I have a journal called a Paranormal Journal that I've kept for many years that I put stories in that happened to me. And I was hunting one day, and this was actually here in Arkansas. And I was sitting on the side of a hill that goes down into a holler and goes over to the other side. And it was a very still day, no wind blowing. And I heard a couple of what I thought were footsteps, like not deer, but sounded like a person. And I was probably 16 at the time. And I was sitting on one side of a big tree, and this was behind me. And I heard just this cracking, this loud cracking sound. And this right after these footsteps, and this tree just fell over, scared the bejeebers out of me. And I just kind of sat there because I didn't want to turn around. And I had no concept at the time of Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but looking back, I don't know what else it could have been. I heard the couple of 3 steps, this tree was pushed over, and, I've seen trees fall because Dad would cut trees, for firewood. And I turned around, and I saw the tree that had fallen just a few, maybe 40 yards from me. Obviously, there was no Bigfoot there, but I think that was probably a Bigfoot, but I can't prove it. Arkansas
doesn't really have a lot of Bigfoot reports, though, does it?
More than you would think. We do. Actually, the Bigfoots here are a little shorter on average, and they're not quite as tall, and they're more of a brown, kind of a sandy color than, say, the ones in the Pacific Northwest, who can be very, very dark brown to almost black.
Yeah, black.
Yeah. But the ones in Georgia tend to be, sandy color. But
interesting.
Anyway.
No, that's a whole nother podcast. We could do a whole podcast on Bigfoot, and I think we will. I think we'll eventually circle back around to that. But no, this was fascinating. Like I said, it's a lot more fascinating than I thought it was going to be. So thanks a lot for kind of guiding us through that. Cryptids 101.
You're welcome.
What we're going to call it. And hey, listen, if you like what you hear, please subscribe. Hit that like button. On YouTube, there's a bell, right? You can hit that bell for notices. So please do that. Right. That'd be great. Check out some of our other episodes as well. We're starting to get a nice little library of these things put together.
And our shorts we're putting on there.
Starting to get a couple shorts on there now. We're going to try to do some more of that even. That'd be great. So, and tell your friends. Tell your friends to come check us out, see what's going on here. We are the Paranormal Christianity Podcast, and drop us a line at paranormalchristianitypodcast@gmail.com. One more time, paranormalchristianitypodcast@gmail.com, or you just leave us a comment on the YouTube page. Dan, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
See you on the flip side.